Hey, what's going on, guys? Ben Brewster here, Triathletics, and today I'm super excited to share this one secret that we've uncovered. This is the magic bullet. This is the one pitching drill that everyone, if they do it, they're going to immediately gain 3 to 5 miles per hour. Now, obviously, if you guys fell for that, you haven't been around too long. We are not in the business of selling magic bullets here.
Halfway. Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got the answers.
You're really going to have a hard time finding quick fixes if you're actually in this thing for the long haul. Some places will advertise that, but at the end of the day, it's not as simple as that one magic pill. So that being said, this video is not a cop-out. I am going to share some of my favorite drills, share some of the context in which these certain drills can be helpful, and also explain why drills aren't necessarily always the answer. So that being said, let's dive into the video and learn a little bit more about the usefulness of drills and give you guys some different ones to try depending on your issues. So first things first, our mechanics are individual. The specific limiting factors that a certain pitcher has are going to be specific to them. So in this specific case, let's say we have player A, player B. Player A has these specific issues. He has an early torso rotation. He's flying open. Maybe he has a low elbow at landing. Maybe he's rushing, so his tempo is actually too fast down the mound. Player B, no drift, so he has a very poor weight shift. Maybe he's coming to a balance point, very slow tempo. And maybe he's got a soft lead leg, so bad lead leg block. He's not transferring energy very well through the ground after landing. So why would we give both of these players the exact same drill prescription? Why would we put them through an evaluation or motion capture or whatever and give them the same 3-4 drills and just say, good luck, go do this exact same prescription? Well, you wouldn't and you shouldn't, because again, we're trying to target different mechanical deficiencies for each of these guys. And so the drills that you select, the interventions that you apply in the weight room, in terms of how you cue them, in terms of the throwing prescription and volume and workload, like all that's going to be different depending on what their specific issues are. So this very much ties into a quote on supplements from Stan Efferding, but when asked what's the best supplement, what's the one supplement I should take, he said, well, the best supplement is supplementing whatever you're deficient in. So somebody deficient in vitamin D should take vitamin D. Somebody who's not doesn't need to take vitamin D. Somebody who's deficient in zinc should take zinc. And that's really the same way that we approach drills or really any sort of prescription when it comes to building a comprehensive velocity program. It's what are you deficient in, and that's what we need to target, whether it's with drills or other ways of targeting that movement and efficiency. So we need to first establish, like, what are that player's specific mechanical issues? What are your issues? Second, we need to establish which of these are symptoms and which of these might be the underlying cause. So player A, for example, he has early torso rotation, he might have a low elbow, and we know he's rushing, he's got a really fast tempo. So we need to be able to figure out, like, which of these might be the underlying issue and which of these are just kind of occurring as a byproduct of that underlying issue. So for example, the low elbow could be occurring, the early torso rotation can be occurring because he's rushing down the mound. And so his arm doesn't have time to get into a good spot. He's flying open with the front side. And so maybe we establish that, hey, the real issue is this tempo is overly fast. So maybe we address it with something that gets you a little bit more stacked, a little bit slower tempo, and see how that influences it. So there's going to be a bunch of different causes here. It's not always just a mechanical cause. Sometimes there's a physiological cause. Sometimes there's a psychological cause. Physiological cause might be something very simple, like maybe this athlete has really tight hips or really tight upper mid-back, really tight thoracic spine. And so they don't have the ability to keep their front shoulder closed. And so that's why they're flying open into early torso rotation. Maybe it's a psychological issue. They just don't simply understand the concept of, hey, I should be trying to stay closed until landing. Maybe they're trying to get everything open as early as possible because that's what one of their coach taught them. So we need to understand the physiological and the psychological to understand the issue. And this is why with our athletes, we can't just look at their mechanics in isolation. If an athlete just emails us and says, here's my mechanics, what do I need to do to fix it? The answer is usually, well, here's some issues, but we don't really know until we look at the movement screen. We talk to the athlete, we understand the history, understand the injury history, all these factors, and now we can see, hey, what's the actual underlying cause versus just looking at the surface level issues. So that being said, we're going to get into some of my favorite drills for some different issues. These are ones that we prescribe all the time. but again, it depends on the context. It's important to realize that, first off, although you clicked on this video wanting to see a drill, drills aren't always the answer to throwing harder. So drills can be a piece of the puzzle. We can chunk a certain part of the delivery. We can focus on a specific flaw, but they're not always the answer. So realize that. And then second, I like to remind guys that most of the time, if you try a drill and it feels more efficient, it feels more fluid connected, the ball starts coming out better, 99% of the time, an athlete can tell when a feel is more efficient for them. And most of the time, they can also feel when something is less efficient. So if the timing is way off, it feels clunky, it feels awkward, usually that's a sign that something is not going well. It's a sign that you're either doing the drill wrong or that maybe that's not the best drill for you. And then on the flip side, if something just feels really connected, fluid, smooth, at every point in my career when I've had these velocity bumps as I play with different drills or long toss or mechanical cues or whatever, it always immediately feels more efficient. The ball starts jumping out. I'm like, wow, that feels really good. What did I do there that's different? So point being, we need to trust our feel as an athlete. You need to trust your feel as a coach. You need to trust when the athletes communicate, hey, that feel it really good. Ask them, how did that feel? How did that feel? And so you can take the feel side and also take the objective radar readings, velocity numbers, long toss distances, etc., and use both of those to indicate whether what we're doing is actually helping or hurting. So what are some of my favorite drills? Well, while we've used dozens of different drills over the years, we keep coming back to some of these drills in particular. So I just picked out some of the basic ones that we use and then kind of separated them by some of the mechanical flaws that we found these to be useful for. So again, this will involve you understanding what your issues are and then applying, hey, maybe this 1 or 2 or 3 drills are worth incorporating into my specific routine, depending on what your issues are. So the first one is, we can kind of separate it into upper half drills or arm action specific drills. The one that we go to a lot is called the lasso drill. The idea of this one is simply to get the arm on time and in plane. So any sort of mechanical flaw where the arm is not in plane or on time, we'll often use this as one of the intro kind of low effort lead into drills to help the athlete feel that. So somebody has maybe a really low elbow at landing, or maybe a high elbow, they're hiking the arm way above the shoulders at landing, or maybe a late arm, their arm is super down at landing, elbow flexion angle way too far inside 90, way too far outside 90. Maybe they're getting into a pushing pattern so they don't understand how to whip the arm out and around. The lasso drill is really good for any of those issues where there's an issue with the throwing arm at landing. The arm action freestyle, figure 8 drills, and going hands over the head. So we picked up the arm action freestyle drill from Dave Cogan. I'll link a video explaining that one. That can be really, really helpful for improving the fluidity, the rhythm, and the sequencing and timing of the arm action. Also really helpful for guys who maybe have kind of a stabbing, choppy aspect to their arm action, or guys who maybe don't know how to use the glove arm and the throwing arm and kind of have those work in opposition, but still with good timing. So the arm action freestyle, that's kind of interchangeable for us. We'll also use figure 8 drills. We'll also play with the hands over the head cue, so out of the windup, having the hands come up and over the head and feeling how the glove arm and the throwing arm work together in this sequenced, fluid manner. So those are all good variations for guys who maybe just don't have a very clean path for their arm and it's just kind of choppy, not that fluid, not that smooth. We can come down to weight shift drills here. So athletes who don't really shift their weight that properly, whether it's in that initial first move, that drift, or whether it's in being able to come out of that drift and get into their back leg and really ride the backside down the mound in that hinge pattern. So the two that we come back to a lot are the leg lift rocker. So rocker drill, coming set wide, but coming into a full leg lift, and then also step backs. So these are very similar drills to each other. It's basically getting your center of mass out in front of where the rubber is, out in front of the back leg. So as you come to that peak of your leg lift, you now understand what it feels like to have your back leg back behind you and your belly button or your center of mass out in front of the back leg to try to feel that drift and by extension that good weight shift. So this is good for athletes who don't have a very good initial forward move. Maybe they've been taught balance points their entire career. Good for athletes who say they can't feel their back leg working. This will help you, especially in step backs, help you feel that transition of direction from the back leg and that lateral force application into the ground. So those are both good from a weight shift standpoint. How about rotational drills? So really common that athletes get overly linear. They kind of get pushy. They have a kind of forward crunching linear finish with their upper half. Maybe they get into early extension with their back leg. They're jumping off the mound, but they don't capture rotation that well. They aren't able to transfer that rotation from their hips into their trunk, into their shoulders, into their arm. So the two here that we really like to start are one, the 10 toes drill and the variations of that, and then two, rhythm rockers. Now both of these they're kind of similar drills, but we're taking the stride out of the equation. So we're simply focusing on, hey, no stride. Let's work on feeling this coiling action and this rotation and getting that energy in a rotational way up through the hips, up through the thoracic spine and the trunk, and then out into the arm, capturing that whip-like mechanism. So again, that's very helpful for guys that overstride, get early extension, or have linear finish. It's feeling that rotation in kind of this isolated context without a stride. And then again, we can add the stride back in with other drill variations as well. So now we get to janitor drills, quick picks, and drop steps. So these are, again, adding in that linear move, adding in the full lower half, where you're not just kind of stationary in place with no stride. So these are very helpful for guys who, again, get overly linear. You're adding that rotational piece because all of these start them in this position where their back is basically facing the target. So we're putting them in some counter rotation. So in order to get to release, it's forcing them to feel being a little bit more rotational than they otherwise would be. So maybe we have an athlete who has early torso rotation. They're used to feeling their front side yank open super early. So we might give them a drill that puts them in additional counter rotation. So they have to feel what it's like to keep that on time, keep that closed, and then rotate with better sequencing. Keep in mind that all of these drills, the janitor drills, the quick picks, and the drop steps, typically work better for guys who have good hip internal rotation and then good thoracic spine mobility. The tighter movers typically don't do as well if you jam them into this counter rotation position. So just something to keep in mind if you're considering adding that to your own drill work. And then finally, overall delivery. So these are drills that very closely mimic how we actually throw in our full delivery. However, we're just trying to add one or two subtle things as far as tempo or timing, or adding a little bit more dynamic athletic feel to it. So the examples here that I gave are walking windups and leg lift curl hops. So walking windup, it's literally just throwing out of your delivery, but you're stepping into it from behind or from about a 45-degree angle. You're trying to add a little bit of additional forward momentum, but other than that, it's very similar to what your regular delivery is. So this is good for guys who have a little bit slower tempo, so getting them more up tempo, feeling more athletic. We're not necessarily trying to change gross patterns or gross kind of angles. We're not trying to change their elbow angle, change their lead knee flexion angle, change their degrees of separation. We're not actively trying to change positions and patterns. The feel for the athlete is, hey, throw out of your delivery, but just step into it from behind. Or for the leg lift curl hop, throw out of your delivery, just go through a hop as you get into your leg lift. And so it's very much the same feel. They're passing through the same checkpoints of their regular delivery, just adding this additional athletic, dynamic version of their delivery. And so we found that if an athlete can feel that way and feel an improvement in those variables in these drills, the transfer is almost immediate, one-to-one to their actual delivery if they can feel it in that specific context. Because again, the specificity very, very high in those specific drills compared to something like a lasso drill where it's a little bit lower specificity and it takes a little bit more work to back chain that through the rest of the delivery. Other overall delivery drill, a lot of people don't think of long toss as a drill, but I consider long toss a drill. It's just throwing. It's throwing in a different context. You can do drill work into a net, you can do drill work in catch play, you can do drill work in long toss. So the great thing for me about long toss is it really helps with the relaxation and the sequencing of the arm, especially if you do it right. And what I'm saying here is kind of Jaeger style long toss, where you allow the arm to open up as you go through the extension phase of the long toss, really a focus on relaxation and sequencing, gradually building up the intensity, and then on the way in, getting downhill and doing pull downs. I particularly like doing long toss out of either an athlete's delivery or out of a leg lift curl hop versus doing like a running curl hop or a shuffle throw. Again, that's individual to the guy, but if you're a guy who's done long toss for a long time, but you're maybe not seeing the best transfer of that to your actual mound work, then doing your long toss out of your delivery or out of a wind up or out of a leg lift curl hop, typically you're gonna see a much better transfer You might not get quite as far in your long toss as a full running crow hop, but the transfer is actually going to be better, and your body's going to be able to feel how you pass through the same checkpoints on an uphill angle to a downhill angle to ultimately getting on the slope. So again, other reasons I love pull downs. We've seen some correlation between guys who can do good pull downs and long toss far distances and having high carry fastballs. So it's a way you can think about long toss as the better throws that are being selected for, the throws where you throw it and you're like, I need to do that again. Those are the throws that carry further. The throws that carry further quite literally have higher vertical break or higher carry and or higher velocity. So long toss is selecting for a high carry, high spin efficiency, backspin fastball with high velocity. And so that's literally what you're training in long toss and in pull downs, if done properly, is that high carry fastball. However, I would just exert caution if you're a sinker ball guy, if you're a sidearm, a low slot guy, because that's what you're working on primarily in long toss. If that's not the game you're trying to play on the mound, if you're a guy who's trying to have a ton of sink, trying to have a ton of arm side run and not be a high carry guy, then doing long toss in that manner could potentially be counterproductive. So let's try to tie this all together and put this in a specific context. Let's talk about one of our athletes, Rohan Honda, who went from essentially a non-prospect, possibly wouldn't have even been a go-to guy in his college team, to basically taking a year off, training with us, and coming out of that a 5th round pick by the Giants, throwing 94 to 97 miles an hour. So how do we apply these concepts, the specific drill work, the mobility work, all that to him? Let's dive in. So here were Rohan Honda's before mechanics. As you can see, pretty rough around the edges as far as the positions, the timing he was able to kind of go through. Again, throwing in the mid 80s before here. So some of the issues, again, we identified from the start: low elbow, very limited scap retraction, early torso rotation, and again, you can see he was very uphill with his pelvis during that first move, so not a good initial weight shift. Again, we already talked about having to pair this with a relevant movement screen. So from the movement screen, what we found was he had tone and tension through his pec minor, so basically tight pecs, same thing through his lat, same thing through his subscap. So he had some internal kind of tug of war going on his scapula, and kind of an inability from a tissue standpoint to be able to let his arm relax and get into plane, get into position that we'd ideally want him into. So it wasn't as simple as telling him to get his arm on time, because he had some tissue related and some mobility related issues that he needed to work through to be able to get into these positions, get into these patterns. So again, it was kind of a two-pronged approach. First thing was he really required that tissue change before being able to get maximum benefit from this actual patterning work. So you can imagine kind of that internal tug of war on his scapula, where any of these muscles that are tight, limiting his ability to get up on time, get into good clean layback. The second part was, after doing some of this mobility work to open up that range of motion, being able to do strengthening and control work in that new range of motion, and then finally progressing to patterning that range of motion. And so that's where some of this drill work can get maximum benefit. But again, you see that we didn't immediately go to drill work with him. He first needed to create that mobility change because we established that was one of the underlying causes. So this is a pendulum drill that one of our coaches came up with, in addition to giving him an overweight ball, so a slightly heavier ball, just to feel that momentum helping his arm get up into place, as opposed to kind of brute forcing his arm with his upper trap, his bicep, and having that excess tension trying to lift his arm into place. So instead, helping feel that momentum relax and take his arm into that kind of high cock position where that elbow gets a little bit closer to shoulder height. And again, the overweight ball, just really helpful in terms of giving some additional feedback of where his arm was in space, so he could really help him feel what that position was and where his arm was behind his body. And then another issue for him, again, he was having trouble. He could do this in an isolated context, an arm action drill and the pendulum drill, but then he had a hard time actually translating that immediately to a catcher. But we saw that he could do it throwing into a screen 10, 15 feet in front of the mound. And so the solution here was just gradually change the context, gradually move the screen back until he was able to get downhill and get that arm up and in plane to a full 60 feet. And from there, he was able to fully translate that velocity, that mid-upper 90s velocity. So again, this change didn't happen overnight. This was a year plus progression and kind of transformation, but you can kind of see how we apply these principles. It was completely unique to his issues. It was understanding what was going on in his body and in his mechanics, and then establishing a multi-pronged approach to get there. And then when he ran into roadblocks along the way, it was being able to problem solve through those roadblocks and figure out, hey, how do we problem solve and adjust the environment, adjust the drill work, adjust the coaching accordingly. So definitely not a, results definitely aren't a straight line, and progress isn't a straight line. So he's just a great example of someone who had this potential in his body, knew he was massively underachieving, didn't know exactly what was going on. Fortunately we were able to help uncover, what was truly inside of his body. So as you can see from the Rohan example, it really is not as simple as one specific drill to give everybody. I've reiterated that a bunch of times, but you really need to stop looking for that one magic bullet and start looking for, hey, how can we build a comprehensive prescription and test and trial that and see and actually measure the results and make modifications along the way. Now that velocity prescription, again, can't simply involve drill work. From a mechanical standpoint, we also need to consider things like cues, things like different constraints that can we leverage and utilize, things like mobility restrictions, as we saw with Rohan, strength, nutrition. Like these can very commonly be an athlete's limiting factors from a velocity standpoint, psychological limitations, and then obviously the data, the pitch design side. There's a whole other side of performance that doesn't simply factor in velocity that we don't need to get into in this video, but is a huge piece of how we train our athletes as well. So again, we need to start looking at it from a holistic standpoint, not simply a one-size-fits-all or a magic bullet standpoint. So hopefully you guys learned something in this video. I wish I could have given you that one magic drill. If I got you with that intro, then go ahead, leave a comment down below. And again, thanks for watching. If you have any comments about this video, let me know down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel as well. And if you don't already follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, we're on Twitter at Tread Athletics, Instagram at Tread_athletics. And then finally, if you are struggling with your own career at any point, shoot us an email, contact@treadathletics.com. We'd be happy to take a look and help. See you guys in the next video.